You're in for a treat, folks, because Mike is a tremendous, not only radio host, but a researcher. And, I mean, he's just, I marvel at the things that he knows and the things he could talk about, pull out of the back of his pocket. But we were talking just before the show started, and he asked me if I was going to talk about this, the gay marriage ruling and everything and the effects of it. Well, of course I am, of course. And for this first segment, that's what I'm going to talk about. But Mike started saying, have you heard about? And then he gave me some information. I said, Mike, I don't know if I've heard that. I'm not sure. He said, let me go get it. I said, Mike, come on, get the stuff, get in here, because I want you to tell the audience this, and let's have a discussion about it. But we were talking about the Supreme Court ruling for, quote, gay marriage, homosexual marriage. I say quote because that's an oxymoron. Marriage, by definition, is one man, one woman together. And, for all of the common sense and biblical and historical and societal reasons. But in the meantime, Mike, let me stop now. You've got in here, you've got your stuff. What is it that you wanted to share?
I am outraged over the Supreme Court decision. And I'm outraged for the same reasons you are. Right. It's unbiblical. It's not cultural. It's not historical. Anthropologically, never in the history of human civilization has same-sex marriage been legal anywhere on the planet until this millennia, when the Netherlands legalized it in 2001.
Right.
So for all those reasons, I'm angry. But as an American and as somewhat of a constitutional scholar, and I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty well versed in the Constitution, I'm particularly outraged at how this court arrived at it.
Okay.
And if you will allow me,
yes,
I want to cite specific quotes from the court. This isn't Mike Bates's opinion.
Right.
This is the opinion of the court. Now, first off, Joey, are you ready with that recording of McCain? Or are you still looking for it? Okay, you are ready for it. Okay. I had said years ago, I was interviewing John McCain on this very radio station where you happen to be sitting right now, Carl.
Right.
I interviewed John McCain when he was running for president. It was January of 2008.
I've interviewed that weasel right here on this show.
He's a rhino imbecile.
Absolutely.
But I asked him about same-sex marriage because he opposed a constitutional amendment defining marriage as the union between one man and one woman. And I said, Senator, without that, the day is going to come where through the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, we're all going to be forced to acknowledge same-sex marriages. We may not be forced to perform them, but if they are performed somewhere else, we will have to recognize them because the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution says that we have to recognize the judicial proceedings and such of other states. It's the same reason that decades ago, before divorce was easy to obtain everywhere, you could literally fly to Nevada, get divorced, fly home, and you're divorced, even if your home state didn't allow it, because the Constitution required it. Well, I thought that's how the court would eventually legalize same-sex marriage. It's like a minute and a half. Listen to this clip from the interview 2008 with Senator McCain.
All right, final question for you, Senator, because I know we're running out of time here.
Yes, sir.
You voted in favor of the Defense of Marriage Act, but you are against a constitutional amendment that would define marriage as a union between a man and a woman. I don't think DOMA goes far enough because it's law and not constitution. The day is going to come without a constitutional amendment prohibiting homosexual marriage. The day is going to come when some federal judge is going to invoke Article 4, Section 1, the full faith and credit clause, and we're going to have homosexual marriages in all 50 states, will we not?
Of course not. Of course not. And every state and every federal judge so far has affirmed DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, and that the states have the right to decide the status of marriage within those states. And I can show you the many both state and federal court decisions. I have said many times that if a superior court would somehow, and I certainly don't believe this Supreme Court, thank God for Roberts and Alito, would say such a thing. But if a superior court did, then of course I would support a constitutional amendment. There's no chance of that passing through the Senate of the United States. But those of us who are working hard to get the states to recognize the unique status of marriage between man and woman have had some success in a number of states, and we will continue to do so. I am a Federalist, and I'm proud of my Federalist record, and those who are not, who favor big government solutions to things, I understand their views, but I don't agree with them.
Well, Senator, There are other questions I'd love to ask, but I am
Go right
actually
ahead.
well.
I'll be glad to answer a couple more.
If
Go
you've
ahead.
got some more time, okay, because we're actually a minute over the allotted time.
What an imbecile.
Okay,
What an
so
imbecile.
you saw what he said, and I'm no great prophet. It was obvious where things are going, okay?
Right.
I knew that absent a constitutional amendment defining marriage as the union between one man and one woman, that the Supreme Court would one day force recognition of same-sex marriage on all 50 states. But I thought it would be done legally. I wouldn't like it, but I thought it would be done constitutionally via the full faith and credit clause. Instead, the Supreme Court just did it illegally through the 14th Amendment. Now, I read 2 years ago, I'm a little weird in that I like to read court cases.
Yeah,
okay?
I know. And the Constitution. I mean, you
I
sit
read
around
the
and read-
U.S. v. Windsor decision 2 years ago. That was a 2013 decision that overturned DOMA. And I made some notes from that, which I want to share with you. But before I get to that, I want to say this. My objection to same-sex marriage is not hate. It is not prejudice or bigotry or discrimination. Those are inflammatory words that are used by the left to discredit and dismiss those of us whose opinion differs from theirs.
Right.
It's an effective, albeit extremely unfair, abuse of the language for political gain, but they're real good at it.
Well, birther, racist, et cetera, that's what they do.
I wholeheartedly agreed, by the way, with Lawrence v. Texas. That was the case where the sodomy laws were overturned. Okay, I agreed with that because I think if someone wants to be a homosexual, it is not the government's concern what they do in the privacy of their home, which is what happened in Lawrence's case.
And I agree with that. And it's not the church's concern. Now, I have a concern for their immortal soul, for their eternal soul. And if they ask me, I'm going to give them the biblical answer. But in the meantime, I don't think the church or the government should be looking in their bedroom window. But when they drag it out in public and make me celebrate it and make me pay for it, that's different.
Well, here's where we're really going to get to the meat of this, okay? Redefining marriage to include same-sex couples is both a social and legal atrocity. And the ruling of the Supreme Court that forced same-sex marriage down our throats is an outrage of both judicial abuse of power and the court's total disregard for the Constitution of the United States.
I agree.
Whatever popular support for same-sex marriage may exist is constitutionally irrelevant.
Right.
The role of the judiciary is not to do what is widely supported. That's the role of the legislature within the confines and constraints of the Constitution. But the role of the appellate courts is to determine the constitutionality of laws. That's pretty much it.
Of a law that's passed. That's right.
Well, here's what the Supreme Court just did in legalizing same-sex marriage. By forcing states to perform same-sex marriage, they misinterpreted the 14th Amendment, okay? And those same 5 justices went 180 degrees different from their exact words 2 years ago. Here are some quotes. Okay. This is from...
Is this on the DOMA ruling 2 years ago?
This is the DOMA ruling, 2000, exactly, in 2013.
Okay.
These are exact quotes from U.S. v. Windsor.
Okay.
This is the majority of the opinion.
Right.
Clearly, I'd be very deceptive if I was reading from the dissent.
Right,
Okay.
right.
This is the majority opinion. This is the ruling that was signed by the same 5 justices that just ruled that marriage is a federal right. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
That's how they came to it.
Okay.
The 14th Amendment, well, if it's a federal right, then the states can't infringe on it, and therefore everybody can have it. It's a free-for-all. That was their logic.
That's right.
Just now, legalizing same-sex marriage.
So read this one from 2 years ago.
This is what they said in 2013.
How quickly we forget.
Quote, regulation of domestic relations is an area that has long been regarded as a virtually exclusive province of the states.
Thank you.
End quote. Quote, each state, as a sovereign, has a rightful and legitimate concern in the marital status of persons domiciled within its borders. End quote. Quote, the definition of marriage is the foundation of the state's broader authority to regulate the subject of domestic relations with respect to the protection of offspring, property interests, and the enforcement of marital responsibilities. End quote. Quote, the states, at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, possessed full power over the subject of marriage and divorce, and the Constitution delegated no authority to the government of the United States on the subject of marriage and divorce.
Not enumerated.
End quote.
Thank you.
Quote, the whole subject of the domestic relations of husband and wife, parent and child, belongs to the laws of the states and not to the laws of the United States. Consistent with this allocation of authority, the federal government, through our history, has deferred to state law policy decisions with respect to domestic relations. End quote. Quote, The significance of state responsibilities for the definition and regulation of marriage dates to the nation's beginning. For when the Constitution was adopted, the common understanding was that the domestic relations of husband and wife and parent and child were matters reserved to the states. End quote. Quote, marriage laws vary in some respects from state to state. End quote. Quote, federal intrusion on state power is a violation of the Constitution because it disrupts the federal balance.
Thank you.
End quote. Those are not my words, Carl.
I know.
Those are the words of the 5 Supreme Court justices that just ignored their own words when they ruled completely opposite to that position by deciding that same-sex marriage is a fundamental constitutional right of all Americans, and that the federal courts could force the states to recognize that as a right. And they, of course, are very, very wrong.
Right. Mike, and I want to say to our audience, if a couple of radio guys can figure this out, Mike, how about the entire United States congressman? How about our congressman? How about your congressman, folks? I know we have people listening from coast to coast. How come your congressman can't figure this out? 2 years ago, the same 5 people who just handed us same-sex marriage, which is illegal, immoral, unbiblical, but let's just forget the Bible now. Let's just talk about the Constitution. Absolutely illegal. It's not an enumerated power. 2 years ago, the same 5 guys that just gave us that and crammed it down our throat and said, this is a federal decision, we're making a federal case. 2 years ago, they said, marriage is not a federal decision. It belongs with the state. And then struck down DOMA because that was a federal law.
Exactly. And I don't want people to take my word for it. I can assure you I'm telling the truth. But I want you to trust but verify. Like Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Trust that I'm telling you the truth. I am. But go to a search engine and type in U.S. v. Windsor Supreme Court. At or near the top of the search results will be the actual case. Now, it's like 100 pages long, okay?
Right.
But if you read it, you will see the quotes I just read
in context
from the majority opinion. Exactly the opposite of what they just did. And that's the true outrage. I mean, this isn't even a matter of, oh, well, the courts evolve. You get different justices. Oh, they have different opinions, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
These are the same people,
The same
Carl.
ones. The same ones. I know. 2 years ago. 2 years ago. How come your congressman doesn't know that, folks? A couple of radio guys know it. Now you know it. How come your congressman doesn't know it? So on WND, and you can go to carlgallups.com, on my first slide at the top called Weasels and Wimps, you can find out of the Republican candidates that are running for president now, only 4 of them support a constitutional amendment to define marriage after this Supreme Court ruling. The others all say, oh, well, it's law now. We have to obey it. Let me tell you who the weasels and wimps are. First of all, the warriors. Ted Cruz, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, and Mike Huckabee all favor a marriage amendment. Who are the weasels and wimps? Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, Lindsey Graham, Rick Perry, Chris Christie, Rick Santorum, Carly Fiorino, George Pataki, John Kasich, and Rand Paul. And then Donald Trump didn't have a position on it at the time of the interview. He's supposed to be making one soon. I don't know where he's going to stand. But bunch of weasels and wimps and congressmen not doing their job, not defending the Constitution. We have 5 Supreme Court justices, by their own words, have admitted now that they have passed an unconstitutional edict upon America. My guest for this first segment, Mike Bates, who is the owner-manager of WEBY and a celebrated talk show host in his own right, and he has put together this material. He did this investigation on Windsor versus U.S. versus Windsor, which was the DOMA ruling just 2 years ago, Defense of Marriage Act, where it was struck down. And we're really simplifying this, although Mike just read every quote that came from it to prove the unconstitutionality of last Friday's SCOTUS ruling on gay marriage, because in the DOMA ruling just 2 years ago, the same justices that just handed us the SCOTUS gay marriage ruling, 2 years ago, they struck down the Defense of Marriage Act and said it was because that language belonged only to the states. The federal government had no right to define what a marriage is. 2 years later, those same justices that struck down DOMA, by their own words, handed us an unconstitutional ruling. They said that it would be unconstitutional to rule otherwise. And now, 2 years later, they handed us an unconstitutional ruling which upheaves the entire society of the United States of America. Is that what's called judicial activism, Mike?
Very much so. I do want to correct one thing you said, though.
Yeah.
Please do. It wasn't every quote. I figured, okay, I got enough, and I moved on. There's more.
Is there really
I'm just not
more?
going to bother telling you them.
I just assumed that was every quote, but you say there's more, huh?
No, but this is absolutely judicial activism, and it is a result of getting the president that we have.
Yeah.
Barack Obama was asked prior to his election in 2008 what kind of judges he would appoint.
Yeah.
And he answered that he would look for judges with, quote, the heart, the empathy to recognize what it's like to be a teenage mom, the empathy to understand what it's like to be poor or African American or gay or disabled or old. In one of the debates, he was asked what kind of judges he would appoint. And again, I quote, he said he would appoint judges who hopefully have a sense of what real world folks are going through. But if that's not bad enough, he went on to say, again quoting, I think that it's important for judges to understand that if a woman is out there trying to raise a family, trying to support her family, and is being treated unfairly, then the court has to stand up if nobody else will. And that's the kind of judge that I want, end quote. So what Obama wants of the Supreme Court are activist legislators.
Right.
He doesn't want impartial judges who interpret the law and apply the Constitution.
That's right.
He wants judges who will stand up and have empathy. Well, that may be an acceptable standard for a congressman or a senator, even a president. But a judge? Absolutely not. Certainly not an appellate court judge.
Thank you.
Maybe at the trial court level you could argue it, but appellate? Absolutely not.
Right. Absolutely not. And, oh my gosh, you said so much, my mind was going. There's 2 or 3 times I wanted to break in, and now I can't remember anything. I should have taken notes. but
well, let me ask you the great unanswerable questions,
okay? Go ahead.
What is next in our slide down the slippery slope into the cultural cesspool as we fundamentally transform the United States of America? Can I simultaneously have more than one wife? Can I marry my sister? Can I marry my brother?
Can you marry your daughter?
Can I marry my mom?
Your daughter.
Can I marry my son? Those may sound like absurd questions, Carl, but it was not that long ago when another absurd question was, can a man marry a man?
Right. And can a woman marry a woman?
Where does it end? And there is no definition for marriage anymore.
There was a story just the other day. A man and his 18-year-old daughter are marrying in New Jersey because the New Jersey laws are written so that that can happen.
I remember
and so
reading
a man
about that.
is marrying his daughter. And now there are already news articles and mainstream media articles and analysis articles about adults marrying children. Pedophilia is what it's called. But now they're already discussing it, and they're saying we can justify it by the same justifications that the Supreme Court ruling just gave gay marriage, because we should be able to marry who we love.
Oh, who we love, of course. That's the standard now. As long as you love them.
That's right. And the little child can say, but I love him. I want to marry him. And what little girl doesn't say, I want to marry my daddy? They don't understand. And so you jump on that and say, okay, she just said she wants to marry me, and I want to marry her. And the law says we can marry who we love. So who are you to stand in the way? Folks, it's coming. It's already coming. It's in the news right now. Mike?
When marriage has no definition,
right,
it has no definition.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So judicial activism. I know what I was going to say. And the Supreme Court, the Congress, according to the Constitution, has the authority to rein in the Supreme Court on this because it was judicial activism.
But they won't.
But that's what I'm saying. Folks, where do your congressmen stand on this? Where do your congressmen stand? I know where mine stands. It's crickets. He doesn't say anything about it. Where do your congressmen stand on this?